there's something very odd about seeing an animal being born and immediately being able to walk and
Hmm.
do all these things
Yeah.
in stark contrast to humans, or
Uh,
in a contrast to humans where we need to
yeah.
be taken care of for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. All of those animals that are prey species, they can be born and are ready to run in a pretty short period of time. And then you have like dogs and cats when, they can't even see and walk or do anything,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
us, where we can't do anything for a long time, and so it's just interesting how those those goats can be born and they're on their feet and
yeah,
in a matter of minutes.
yeah.
It's
It's
pretty
insane.
amazing.
It's special. What is your first memory, if I may ask, if you have one?
My very first memory,
Yeah.
that's a good question. To have to sort through some, it's hard to I'd never thought which one is first.
Yeah.
Um I have these memories of uh the house I grew up in when I was young, and so a lot of those memories are associated with that house. But um, probably like the most powerful early memory I have is staying at my grandma's house, and my grandfather died the year I was born, so I'm named for my grandfather. This is on my dad's side of the family, and so we would often go to her house for Christmas, and so we would all be staying at her house, and my cousins were up there, aunts and uncles, and all of that, and I remember we they would the all of the cousins were all really similar age, so we would all have to go to bed. And I remember on multiple occasions getting up and walking into the living room where the grown-ups were, and there's a fireplace there, and there would be a fire, and they would be sitting around it, and there would be a face in the fire,
Oh,
like, and they would be talking to it, like, and it was never a dream. Like, it's one of those weird things I can't account for in terms of, I've actually not ever, I think I mentioned it to my grandma once because she had a mind for spiritual things, and I don't, and she just didn't know what I was talking about, So, but it was one of those experiences that happened multiple times that I am, what no it was no what I know it wasn't a dream,
mhm.
and just I was so, um I mean, it was a little scary on one level, and but it didn't scare, like, it wasn't frightening, like, it didn't fill me with terror in that sense, but it was kind of scary just because it was so strange.
Yeah,
But it filled me with like mystery, like, what's going on? What's this
yeah,
about? Like, who are they talking to? You know? Um, and I don't know, like, part of me feels like I could have associated it with my grandfather.
mhm.
Um, but I can still see that face in my mind.
What kind of face was it? Was it a male or a female? Could you make that
I
out?
feel like it was a male face. Like, that's what it felt like to me. It felt like a masculine face, and it had a masculine voice. And it wasn't like an unkind face, but it was just like in the flames, on a human scale. Like, the head was essentially like that size, and it would just be talking to them. And I don't remember ever hearing, like, understanding what anything that was being said, other than just being just amazed by it.
Uh,
um and and like I said, I've it happened two or three times that I remember, and it's just one of those really potent early memories that
yeah,
I have.
yeah,
uh, so it's, yeah, don't again, and I've never quite known what to do with it,
yeah,
uh, in the sense of, uh yeah, it's just, but it's interesting.
Do you think it's a unique to you that you saw that, or do you think that um, there's a chance that if you would ask some of your cousins, for example, it'd be like, oh, maybe somewhere deep
Yeah,
down there
that's a
they
good
saw some.
question. I should ask my cousin. You know, I've always been pretty quiet about stuff like that. Um, but it would be interesting
Yeah,
to see if anybody remembers anything like that, you know. Um, but uh, I feel like if I asked any of my the elder generation, they would just kind of I don't experience tells me there's not a category for that necessarily,
I see.
or maybe not a category, but it wouldn't be a good category,
Yeah,
uh,
okay.
if that makes sense. But
It
you know,
does.
I could be jumping to conclusions there. You
Is
never
that why
know.
you were maybe reluctant to share some of these things because you felt like there wasn't a good category for them?
Yeah, probably. I mean, you grow up. I think in the you know I grew up as in the evangelical kind of you know, Western evangelical juggernaut, you know,
Hmm.
and so any it's almost like anything spiritual is evil, you know,
Yeah,
in a sense.
yeah,
So and which is strange, but it, so I think there is certainly some just kind of and not even understanding it myself, you know, but I've never had the sense that personally that face was something evil,
yeah.
you know. I mean to me it was like my grandma, because my grandma especially like um and I feel like I talked to her about it at one point, and I just, you know, because she was a really unique woman, and she resisted categories and stuff like that, and so she was always, you know, she when my grandfather died, she just told Jesus, she said, "You're my husband now."
Mm,
You know, like you said this, you said you'd be a husband to the widows, and I'm taking you at your word, and she lived that way, like she took it seriously and was so she had a really neat relationship with Jesus, you know,
mhm.
and she was very open to spiritual things, and she actually taught me a lot about the Holy Spirit when I
Yeah,
was in college. um so and that would have been the time I probably would have tried to talk to her about that experience. But I don't remember. I'm doubt. It's one of those. I don't. You would think I would remember her
yeah,
talking to her about that, you know.
yeah.
But
It's a good
other
point.
than just like feeling like maybe I did, and she just didn't know
Yeah.
what to think about it, you know. Um, but so and she was always kind of the black sheep, you know.
I see.
None of the rest of my family, because everybody else was pretty a little more like um oh I don't even want to I don't mean to kind of sort of cast them in as a poor light, you know, because
Yeah.
I love my family and they're great, you know, but it's just that kind of worldview, you know,
Hmm.
where my dad is a real much more Calvinist, you know, and very reformed in his theology. And I mean, and it's something that he thinks about, and he got there because it's something that he thinks about. Um, and so, but he was always butting heads with my grandma because she was so much more like a feeler and
I
you
see.
know
And is your
much more
grandma
intuitive and
is it your dad's mom or is it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So they would have these huge arguments about God all the time. It was they were good. I mean, it was they were both super stubborn, and
Yeah.
so they were great. They were they loved each other dearly, but it was they exasperated each other too, and
Yeah.
so it was a good experience actually to kind of see all that playing out, you know,
Mm.
with because I respect, you know, my grandma has passed on, you know, but you know, I have such a deep respect for both of them
Yeah.
and where they're coming from and how they got to where they are. Um, but I probably align a little more with my grandma
Yeah, that makes sense.
in
That
terms
makes
of
sense.
that. But
Did you grow up in a big family in terms of the household?
um, oh, I have two sisters, so I'm between two sisters. I have an older sister and a younger sister, and
Yeah.
we're all about 2 years apart. So,
Okay.
so not a huge family, but lots. We had a lot of cousins on both sides, and we spent a lot of time with all of those. So
Mm.
it always felt like we had a big family, just because we did a lot of stuff with both groups, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so that was good,
I don't
getting
know why, but
close.
I'm picturing a lot, and I'm trying to see what kind of like house are you in? Is it are you on a farm? Are you in a suburb? Are you in a
Yeah, so I live out. I live in out and off on a farm, and I have 6 kids, so I've got a big family.
yeah. Yeah.
um, so so yeah, we live out outside of. So the closest big town is Wichita.
Uh-huh.
Um, so Wichita is the biggest city in Kansas, and it's kind of in the southern part. It was an old cow town, you
Yeah.
know, and and then it and then there was, well, and it's named for like the people group, that the Native American people group that were here,
Ah,
were
okay.
the Wichita. They were that was kind of there. In fact, there were huge Wichita cities,
Yeah.
and they've found evidence of that. They found evidence that this complex of like encampments, and well, the real genuine cities were like, um, the biggest individual single city was like 20,000 people.
Wow.
Um,
Insane.
so yeah, so it's really interesting. Uh, but anyways, the Wichita, it's the modern city is about, I think it's about 600,000
Ah,
people.
okay. So it's quite big.
A
Yeah.
lot of manufacturing, like they build a lot of airplanes here,
Mhm.
um, and things like that. And so um, we're about maybe 12 miles from Wichita.
Okay.
So, um, depending on, it's always, how cities are always expanding at
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. They're coming
huge
closer.
pace. So we're definitely we're close enough that we could get subsumed, you
Yeah.
know, in the future. Um, so,
Is that
but
is that where you grew up as well then?
yeah, I've been in this area, um, my whole life, and my dad's family is from Missouri,
Okay.
which is the state just directly to the east of Kansas. And then my mom's family has been in Kansas for like 5 generations,
Wow.
um, pretty long time. They
Yeah.
lived in sod houses and all that stuff, you know.
Uh,
So
wow.
so yeah, it feels good to have some deep roots,
Yeah.
you know, in this, as deep as a European can, have in this land,
Yeah.
uh, but uh, yeah, I love Kansas dearly.
Good. Where does it go back to? Like, where do you know where your ancestors come from before
Germany,
Germany?
Germany, yeah, both sides. That's the heaviest. Wolf is my mom's,
Okay.
um, and Kaimig, uh, but Wolf is, and then Baumgartner, of course, is
Yeah.
a good German name.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
um, so,
Cool.
um, but yeah, so that's most of my genes are German.
I see. As a child, were you, I don't know, were you a thinker? Like, or were you, it's I don't know why I categorize it like this, but I often encounter people that either they're like maybe a little bit more broody, maybe more
Uh,
thinky,
uh,
and some are much more outward, or somewhere in between. Do you remember
yeah.
that about yourself?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I would say that I wasn't shy or anything, like, overly reserved or anything like that, but I definitely have always sort of liked being by myself and
Yeah.
playing by myself, and
Okay.
drawing. I've always done these things where it's, just sitting and drawing, and or building things with Legos,
No.
you know or my, all that type of stuff. So I was always very, um, um, I guess if you could use the word introverted, that's
Yeah.
definitely always been,
But not
um,
shy.
yeah, not necessarily shy. I
Yeah.
got shy, but I
That's
didn't
it.
start out shy. I don't
I
think,
get what you mean. Yeah, I get
because
that.
they had to put me on a leash when I was a little kid, apparently. So I would just go and talk to anybody, if when we were going out in public,
Yeah.
So I wasn't shy when I was little, but I definitely, I I definitely assumed some shyness over time, and now I'm having to kind of grow out of it again a little bit. So
See. Yeah. What did you draw when you started drawing? Do you remember?
I mean, I remember drawing landscapes a
Mm,
lot, just imagined landscapes. Um, I remember drawing pictures for my dad when he would, um, my dad was a roofing contractor, and well, when I was little, he was the superintendent of, and so they traveled and put roofs. They did like big flat roofs on like schools or,
mm,
industrial buildings and things like that. And so they would travel all around the state and other states to do these jobs. So he would travel a lot when I was a kid, um, and I remember always drawing pictures and stuff for him when he was gone.
yeah.
Um, so I would, so a lot of things like little kids normally draw.
Yeah.
uh, and but I'm trying to, and then I would start doing. I remember when I started learning the like stories from the Bible, I did a lot of. I liked drawing those stories.
I see.
My mom still has a book that I made of Elijah, um, Elijah's encounter with the prophets of Baal, where he like, calls has him pour water all over the altar, and then calls down fire, and then he kills them all. It's a really brutal book. I spared no that didn't spare the gore in it.
Yeah.
So it was all
I guess a good thing
so
to draw.
yeah. So I was, always drawing stuff like that too. And when I started learning those stories, and um, so it was my I I had some, we would go to Sunday school, and I would often, thankfully, I had some accommodating Sunday school teachers, I guess, because they would just let me sit under the table and draw
I see.
during Sunday school.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, apparently I started getting shy around then, I guess, because that was much more comfortable
Yeah.
place to be, is under the table drawing and then
I wonder what
participating in the
what did the
lesson.
drawing do for you at that age? Did it help you integrate stories? Did it help you to, I don't know, to think about them or
That's a good question. It's hard because it's hard to not want to pattern how I feel about that stuff now on
yeah,
then, because I know how it works for me now.
yeah,
So it's curious to think how it worked for me then. Um, you know, uh, I think on one level, it's just that stuff is cool. I
yeah.
mean, it's just like, wow, this is so cool. I want to make a picture of this. Or there were these great murals in the nursery of the church that I grew up in that somebody had done, and those are probably among some are good early memories too, actually.
Yeah.
And one of them was Jonah, and it was this huge. It was huge. So the whale, they just did a whale, which and it was a well done. It wasn't a at least in my memory, it wasn't a cheesy
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of just, sappy uh, kids mural. It was still for kids, but it was cool.
yeah.
And I
Okay.
just remember those images, and there were other ones too. I imagine the Jonah one is the one that sticks in my memory, but I imagine there were other, like Noah or things like that. Um, I know there were more. but the Jonah one is the one that really sticks, always has stuck in my mind. Um, and so, I just, though you see those things and like, this is so cool. I want to do this,
Yeah,
I want to make pictures that are cool like that.
yeah,
So, so all those stories are, uh, are so interesting, you know,
yeah,
and, and vivid and definitely appeal to the imagination of it, well, anybody, I think, but especially a little kid.
yeah,
So I love drawing those stories. Um, and and so yeah, I guess it was just a way of, so I think on one level it's just, it was cool and I
yeah,
like
yeah.
cool
I see
stuff.
what you mean. Yeah, yeah,
And I look at my kids now and they're that way. It's like, whoa, this is amazing. It's fun watching like these funny little trends go through my, just in the little subculture of my kids.
yeah,
And like what they'll get into these huge, like, for a while they were all drawing like big fish, like fish eating other fish. And so
uh-huh.
they'd have these just huge, and they'd have to like tape pieces of paper together because to
Yeah,
do
yeah.
this huge
Keep
long
going.
chain of like, and then you'd have
Yeah,
this huge, like, just all you could see was the mouth of like this giant shark with just teeth. And so they got obsessed with doing these drawings for a really long time. It was really funny.
yeah,
But so yeah, I don't know, it's just funny how that works
yeah,
with, in the, where you get kind of fixated or thinking that something is really exciting or interesting, and it stimulates your imagination or in these things.
yeah. It's funny because the way I grew up, I think we were just so digitized and so
Mhm.
bombarded with TV and video
Yeah.
games that just kind of captured, at least I can speak for myself, me so much more, to the point
Mhm.
where listening to Bible stories for me seemed like so dull.
Yeah.
Even though, my father really tried to make it alive. Uh,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I feel like maybe I was born in the wrong uh, century because my childhood was basically overtaken by uh, yeah, well, video games, pop culture.
Mhm.
Any picture you see of me after age 8, I just have like dark circles around my eyes from all the screens and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't wish that upon kids today, but yeah, I I I wish I was more, I don't know, pulled by these stories because now I'm fascinated by a lot of them.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
and by art produced. So Emily, for example, Emily's a good
Yeah.
example because the way that she produces art based on the biblical stories is so, I don't know, it brings a whole nother layer to it for me because I'm so used to specific depictions from like,
Yeah.
children's Bibles that I read, that this
Mhm.
kind of makes it so much more alive for me. Um, so yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, Emily's approach is really great. How she's looking at these stories and um, taking them from I mean, I really love that she's not appealing to the kind of
yeah,
literal sort of um, illustration
mm,
of a story, but that she's really taking it to this sort of, where she's really focusing on like these spiritual and psychological dynamics that are really important. I really love how she does that, and I know she does a lot with Jonah too.
yeah,
So
yeah. I have a
uh,
print in my bedroom of that
awesome.
of that one. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I think I think she really wrestles with the stories in an honest way before she makes art out of it, let's say. I think she
Yeah.
really thinks about them and then she creates the art.
It's good. Yeah, I
Anyway,
love it.
it's special to be connected by her
Hmm.
to you. And I was wondering, as a child, perhaps I don't know what age it would be, but did you have any idea what you wanted to be growing up? Or was that different throughout different ages, let's say?
I mean, once I got past wanting to be a trash man,
I had
um,
the same. No way. I wasn't even going to mention it because it's always something so stupid, but I had the same. Same ambition.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really wanted to be a garbage man. But yeah, once I got over that, I
But
always
why?
wanted
Can
to.
you tell me why? I'm curious
I
just
don't,
to
it's probably just because I liked watching them. I'm not sure, but it
yeah.
was just one of those things where it's a good question. I'm not really ever thought about why. It was one of those things where it's like, this is cool. I
Yeah.
love what these guys do. Um, but the so that yeah, it's not something I've plumbed too much
Yeah.
other than uh I think about it when I my own, that because all of my kids, I've a wide swath, from like 18 to 3.
I see.
And so they all go through these. It's fun watching them think about, what they want to be when they're little. And it's kind of this similar thing. It's like, this is really cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure there's a better word for it than that, but I think there's sometimes it's just this great appreciation. You see something, you just are filled with awe, and you think
Yeah.
like, this is just so magical and fascinating. Like, there's a truck that eats trash.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing.
It
A
is pretty
truck that eats
amazing.
trash.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're helping people, like there's just these things. It's like there's these things that I'm sure like a child would key into, um, this sort of regularity, um and you have, yeah, anyways, it's interesting. You're sort of connected with them in this funny, intimate way,
Yeah.
because they're taking something um from you. So I don't know, but I that's what I so I definitely wanted to be a trash man when I was little, very
Uh-huh.
little. And but other than that, I've always wanted to be an artist. um
Yeah.
I sometimes thought like that I wanted to be a missionary off and on, a different, when I was young too, but it was always sort of like, it always sort of piggybacked to being an artist.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so the desire to be an artist came early and never really left.
I see.
Um,
So
so
what kind of art did you feel inspired to make? And I guess did that change over time or has that been relatively constant throughout your life?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I honestly, I kind of feel like I feel like, in a sense, like an arrow, that I was shot out like an arrow, and I've been going the same direction my whole life,
I
you
see.
know, um, and that there's never been any like doubt in my mind that, like, I mean, I have plenty of doubts, don't get me wrong, and lots of uncertainty and like misgivings and everything. But at the other, but it always comes back to, what else would I do? What
Yeah.
else would I do? Like, um, so, uh, so there's always been probably a lot of consistency in terms of, this is what I care about, and so, in a sense, you could say, like, um I mean, of course I loved drawing, and drawing was the main form for so long, um and until I was able to start learning how to paint. And and then so then painting has always been like the penultimate
Yeah. Yeah.
form,
Yeah.
oil painting has always been the sort of penultimate form for me. But there's all sorts of other, I love printmaking, and I do that. And I mean, I have my hands in a lot of different forms. I also really love puppetry, and have done a lot with that. And it almost, it kind of competes with painting, and at this stage where it's its potential is pretty incredible. But I would but painting it's hard to compete with painting,
Yeah.
in terms of how much I love it, uh, and and how it fits into what I feel called to do, in a sense. But it's
What do you feel? your art brings about in yourself and perhaps in others.
Well, you know, in terms of what it does, you know, how it functions for me at this point, it's like, and it, and I would say, like, at this point in my life, there's a lot of things that resonate in the same space, and so and I find myself trying to think about them similarly, like agriculture, for example, um, or music. Um, I mentioned puppetry, or building furniture. Uh, so there's all these different things, and then painting, and they all like have a different they all like have a different frequency in that space, right? But it's kind of, for it's all about uh relationship, essentially,
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm seeking to, and I'm always like, I'm discontent with the language that I have available to me to describe it, um but I would say, for lack of a not having that language in that space,
Yeah.
you uh is, it's like I seek to know God through all these things,
Okay.
um and sometimes I would say now also, it's like I also seek to unknow God through all these things, so like it's knowing and unknowing through the same things. So I mean, in the but the idea is like, it's like a, you could, a playing field, or
Yeah.
I again, I don't know. Some of the metaphors annoy me now, but that I've used in the past, but
Yeah.
uh, but I would say, let's just stick to painting. Um, I learned that I could, if there was something that I didn't understand, or just something that I felt drawn to, um, then I could just paint about it, you know.
Mm.
So, and that would be like, and God would answer me through painting,
Yeah.
so it's like this long form answer. It's this really long form answer, and even maybe calling it isn't an answer, isn't even the right word. It's more of like this long form interaction
Yeah.
over these things.
Yeah.
That's just like, I'm spending all this time making work, and a lot of that even goes back to these ideas of, um when I was in college, this I started using this prayer that I got from the Trappist. From the Trappists, is like, make the work of my hands into a prayer.
Mm.
So that was
Yeah.
like, I just wanted everything I did with my hands. I love that. It was such a helpful thing for me. So I wanted everything that I did with my hands to be prayer,
Yeah.
and so that can't help but like kind of explode your definition of what prayer is too,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that was a great thing for me to start exploring, you know and realizing that when I'm working on a painting, that that it's communi I'm communing,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and sometimes I really feel it, and sometimes I don't.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like the other person that goes into this big equation is this guy, Brother Lawrence, and he's pretty well known for his, his kind of series of letters called that are in a book called The Practice of the Presence of God. So he was he was just a lay, like a
Yeah.
friar, and he washed dishes and stuff like that. And he just he was Nicholas Herman was his name. And he just started. It became like doing these. He didn't even like washing dishes,
Yeah.
but it became this his way. And he was just with God and everything that he did, and to the point where it was like, as much all of these monastic sort of liturgies and these things that were meant to cultivate that were less effective for him
I
than
see.
just him experiencing God's presence while he was doing his labor,
Yeah.
mending shoes
Yeah.
or doing dishes. Which is so that was another beautiful thing that really appeals to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that work, because it was always like that was again there was always this little question in my head. You hear these things when you grow up going to church or whatever, that or I think Paul says pray without ceasing. you
Mm.
know
Yeah.
and there's these things that like you hear and you latch onto, but you don't know how they work. It's like, well, I would really like to do that, but I don't know how.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like? Or I think with that, with even bigger than praying without ceasing, was this like sort of persistent desire I always had to, like, what would it be? How do I, and this was before I ever learned about Brother Lawrence, like, how do I remember God all the time? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
how does this become like all perpetually before me? How does like this idea of God, or who God is, or like, what is it? What is that? How do I do that? And so it was amazing to meet Brother Lawrence and the Trappists and realize that they were, or like the pilgrim in the Way of the Pilgrim, the Russian, who prays the Jesus prayer, all the time. And
Yeah.
there's that great book about his journeys, um, praying that, and that kind of hesychasm, I guess. But um, so learning about that, and I just was like, I can do this with art.
Yeah.
Painting can be this. I mean, everything I do can be this. Um, and but a measure of that is recognizing that, because painting can be a really tedious thing. Like the way I paint, anyways, is really meticulous and slow. And um, so there's this kind of faith operation,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's
You have
like
to trust it.
you're like in this place, and is it, and that not always can I bear witness to. It's not like it's like bliss or something,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
of like this constant presence. But I think there's, at some level, it's like things are happening. I can't see it or understand it all the time, but I'm engaged in this dialogue, and that there's that this through this whole process of like listening while painting, or painting as listening, and uh and that there's a level, a dimension of action that I'm mostly unaware of, that's happening while I'm doing my work.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing the work about matters to that, like the
Yeah.
imagery is part of that, and the materials are part of that.
Yeah.
The um so the atmosphere and the space that I work in is part of that. So it's this interesting kind of uh interplay of spirit and material.
Yeah. Do you see what you're going to paint before you start painting it, or does it unravel as you're in the process of painting? Is it a
um
yeah?
yeah, it's a good question. It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
The By the time I get to the actual painting, applying paint phase of a
Yeah.
painting, I've got a pretty good idea.
Do you sketch it out first?
So I do a lot of drawing ahead
Yeah.
of time, and so it's in that stage. Sometimes um, I'll see. I used to almost be like, um, I always kind of described it as like a parade, um, and it would often happen in like September,
Hmm.
and I would just start seeing it. It was I just would start seeing images um, go by, like ideas. All these ideas would start flowing, and more than I could ever lay hold of. I couldn't draw them fast enough, and so I would have to just sort of see which ones were the most interesting to
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
or that I could remember of all these things these ideas and that would go by. Um, and so that was always kind of interesting and it was I always thought it always struck me out that it was um there was probably 4 or 5 years at least where it was like clockwork in September
yeah,
that this would start. And it's a little different now, um, which is fine. I mean, it's just part of you grow and you learn to
yeah.
do
It's different.
different things, and how things come is different. So it's just this process of thinking about different things. And I mean, I feel like I have at this point I have more ideas than I'll be able to complete in my life before in my life, now.
Wow.
And so it's just kind of and there may be new ones, and I'll have to scrap the things I'm working on now to do those. Yeah, I mean, who knows?
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so sometimes and sometimes even just through drawing, I'll have like a feeling about something, or it's like I want this is um it'll be a rudimentary idea image, sort of like what comes in this parade, and then I have to try and draw it, because it's not like it appears as a finished. it's,
no,
it's hard to say. It's like how it actually like manifests in that dimension. But um so then like trying to get it, so then there's a long process of like drawing, and sometimes I'll have to draw something over and over and over again until like I start to feel like this really feels good, or like I want to make a painting about this or something. um, or sometimes it'll be, there's a painting I'm working on right now is about this vision of the prophet of Zachar that the prophet Zechariah had. um, it's kind of occupies the third and fourth chapters of Zechariah, and it's this really intense vision that he has. And but it's also this really beautiful. It's always been one of my favorite uh, sort of moments in the Old Testament. Um, and I like Zechariah because I feel like he uses the same, like I feel like we speak the same language.
yeah,
Like I remember when I first sort of like discovered his visions again as an adult, and it was like, wow, I understand what he's saying. It was like I'd understand this language, visual language that he's using was
yeah,
felt so similar to the visual language that I had begun to develop as an artist. And but then this vision is this beautiful, an angel takes Zechariah up to like the heavenly council chamber, same thing, the space up in that the and like it's really reminiscent of the beginning of the book of Job, where God is talking to the accuser, and he's like, what have you been doing? Oh, I've been roaming to and fro. And what do you think about Job? And so they're having this conversation, and they're sharing the same space. It's like he's reporting,
yeah,
it's like when everybody would come to, the knights would come back to King Arthur after, you know they've been
yeah.
questing or something, and they give a report. It's like that. And it's this court scene, and so that's what this is similar to in Zechariah. And in this case, the accuser has the high priest, Joshua, and he's been in exile. This is right at the end of, or right after that, the big long exile in Babylon. And
Yeah.
he's accused, and so the accuser has Joshua in chains, and he's just saying, look at this guy, he's in filthy rags, he's in chains, like he's accusing him before. And so then the angel of the Lord restores him. He washes him, and they put clean garments on him. And there's even this moment where Zachariah, who's watching from the side, like shouts out, like, put a clean turban on his head.
Yeah.
So they put a clean turban on his head. Well, that part cracks me up, because it's
Mhm.
like, he can't resist yelling out, like, you got to put a turban on his head. And they're like, okay. And so it's this beautiful restoration. It's like this beautiful moment of this intensely profound administration of grace and restoration,
Yeah.
you know. And then there's all this ancillary symbolism happening and going on. um and I've always, I've loved that, and for so long. And so I did some drawings, trying to think about, like, what would this look like, just wanting to draw pictures about it. um and so I did 2 or 3 drawings, and I sat on a drawing for a really long time, and then I finally just felt like making a painting about it. um so that's a really long, drawn out way of, like, how I got from, like, just this, really loving this story and feeling like it's really important and has a lot to say. And there's this declaration, even, that the angel of the Lord makes, of, like, I will remove the guilt of this land in one day.
Yeah.
and and it's like this statement, which I think is so significant in our for every time. I mean, it's like, but in our time, when you think about how broken our land is,
Mm.
all the land, the whole earth is in this kind of despair.
Yeah.
Right. And so to think about that, like, I don't have it's one of these things where it's like, I'm not looking for answers, and I'm not looking to say anything, you
Yeah.
know, I'm just looking to, like, understand,
Yeah.
so it's like, I love this passage, there's so much in it. I know that, like, the grace is beautiful to me, but there's so much I don't understand. And I don't understand what that means, to remove the guilt of the land in one day. Like, I, and I, so it's all this. So it's just kind of like, my only solution is to paint about it, you know, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So,
It
like,
does.
painting becomes this technology of, like, what is this? Like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
What is this? This feels so significant, to to and so it's just a way of, like, wrestling, in a sense.
Yeah.
uh, right.
Yeah.
So,
It sounds a lot like what Emily does, I think.
mhm.
Wrestling and
Yeah,
trying to understand, let's say,
yeah,
and
yeah.
feeling this urge to do something with it, to
Mhm.
express something. Um, I was struck by something you said. You said that through your art, you seek to know God, but you also seek to unknow God,
Uh-huh.
I believe. And what do you mean by unknowing God? Like the
Okay.
idea of God,
Yeah.
or God himself?
Like, so it's more of, like, unknowing my ideas of God,
Yeah, okay. So like
right? Mhm.
Meister
Things that,
Eckhart.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
totally in that tradition. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's totally in the tradition of Meister Eckhart. Um, and, all that kind of long mystical tradition of unknowing. And there's one of my favorite, sort of writers, thinkers, is a guy named John Moriarty. He was an Irishman, and he had been like an academic and left, and he just was a gardener for the rest of his life and wrote books that few people wanted to read, and now people now he's passed on, but people are starting to pay attention to him. And
Ah.
um but I love him so much. And but he says, he tells this story. This is a good unknowing story. um and so he tells this story of, he had been an academic in Canada, and he just he left. He didn't want to participate really in that anymore, and he came back to Ireland and was in this sort of a wilderness area in the mountains, I think, called Connemara. I'm not familiar with the landscape of Ireland, so it's just through reading books like his that I, or others. But so he talks about, he would just go for long walks, and he talks, and he's trying to, he's just wrestling. He's in kind of despair, and he startles up this hare. He's in this heather, which is like this evergreen shrub that, you read about and hear about all the time. Um, and So he startles up this hare as he's walking, and like, so his first reaction, like, it seems like almost without thinking this, he like immediately like puts his head into this place where the hare had been.
Ah.
Right.
Okay.
So he like, he's like, it's still warm. He can still smell the hare in there, and he just puts his whole head in there, and he's like, I'm asking the hare's form to like suck away my European mind, is kind of how he describes it. And he's just like, I just want all of this stuff out of my head, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because it's in the way.
I see.
It's like this way of knowing is in the way of how I need to, of a new way of knowing,
Yeah.
And so he goes through this long experience, and it's a great story to listen to him tell. He's a great one to listen to, and it's such a strange sort of cadence, and how he repeats, he does these great repetitions, and he's really great to listen to. Uh but I really liked that, how he just, that expression of, I wanted this form, this animal's form, to like minister to me and pull away,
Yeah.
help to pull away this sort of rational European enlightened sort of, I know everything, that kind of what everybody sort of seems to be up against these days, right? What the material, rational materialism,
Yeah.
that kind of thing that, is, um so he wanted this out of the way. So it's that kind of unknowing sometimes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you kind of even have to, the funny thing is, everything becomes, and any way of knowing ultimately becomes a trap, right? After it's run its, so
Yeah.
it's not the thing, because it's what's doing the pointing or the describing,
Yeah.
but
It's the
eventually it
tool.
runs its course, right? And
Yeah.
then you have to find, because God is always more, God is
Yeah.
always deeper, he's further. And so like there's those limits, you're always coming to the limitations of the forms,
Yeah.
right?
But I guess being human necessitates uh, that we need those tools. We need that
Yeah.
ground to stand on, even though it may be false in some way. But it's
Yeah,
yeah.
we still need it. Yeah,
Yeah, we need it.
it's a great conundrum. I mean, it's the I've come to really delight in those things
Yeah.
that work for us and work against us at the same time,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It reminds me of Batman: The Dark Knight, where he says something like, "You either live long enough to, uh, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain." That's kind of what it feels like for me. Like
Yeah.
anything that you cling
Mhm.
on to for too long or too hard turns
Yeah.
into something that works against you. But
Yeah.
but it can be extremely productive in the right. if you love it proportionately, let's say.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah, right.
so yeah,
I, I think that's why I like the idea of Christianity being called the way,
yeah,
you know, and or that it once was called that. And I kind of
yeah,
wish it
yeah.
still was because
Sorry.
it implies that you're, because in a sense, like the it's even funny because you have like in the way
Yeah,
goes with being in the way, and so it's like that's how you're constantly negotiating these things that are in the way and then in the way. The
yeah,
way they're the way and then they're in the
yeah,
way. And
yeah,
so you're like, but it's that it shows that you're moving, right? And that
yeah,
it's a living thing, not a stagnant um sort of system, right?
yeah. And I mean, connected to the Taoists, I think it's in the Tao Te Ching
Mm-hmm.
expressed that you cannot, you cannot grasp the way fully. You have to, it's
Yeah.
like you describe with your art. You interact. You don't get answers, but you interact, and you get a sense, but you cannot articulate it or make it known or something like that.
Right, right.
You have to be in
Yeah.
communion with it, and so
Uh,
that's
yeah.
that's difficult because I think it's kind of in our nature to absolutize our frameworks and our glasses and our. I
Yeah.
think it's so hard not to
Yeah.
idolize, to create
Uh-huh.
false idols.
Yeah.
Uh, that almost that almost every institution, no matter what institution it is, and no matter how necessary it is, it always, in a way, it is always corrupt, and we're always corrupt in a sense. But
Mhm.
we still are human, and we still need. And I like that you kind of are able to delight in that conundrum or in the paradox. Let's say, like
Yeah.
I think it is something to be a bit more light about because I don't know if it turns into this like wrestling match.
Uh,
There's no winning. There's just
uh,
I don't know,
yeah.
being resentful or yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny with the idolatry. There's another sort of thinker writer that I enjoy a lot right now is a guy named Tom Cheatham, and
Ah, yeah, I've been
he
in
writes.
email with
Okay,
him
yeah, all
because
right, good,
yeah,
yeah, he's great. So he
yeah,
writes a lot about Henry Corbin and
yeah,
the imaginal, and
yeah,
so but one of the ideas is that with idolatry and the thing that is that this sort of like when how literalism leads to idolatry,
yeah,
and it's a pretty fascinating um, dance, you know, uh, with like what you're seeing and what it can lead to, and how when this idea that it's a good space, because it's sort of like, well, we've gotten to where we think that literal means real,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And we forget that literalism is still is an abstraction,
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
and
so
so
odd.
it's kind of, yeah, it's like it's a little bit mind bending, but uh, it's not. It becomes as this, well, it becomes an idol, that
Yeah,
again is in the way of the truth,
yeah,
and so because then you immediately forget that the truth is a person. You think the truth is a thing,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. That's funny.
So yeah, he's great, Tom, and he's hilarious too. Like he's
Mm,
fun just to listen to because he's
yeah.
so funny and so jovial, and but he's on a great, a kind of an interesting journey right now
Mm,
too, but I his books are great. Like his Imaginal Love is incredible um book. And so, but he's written a number of these books that are just him encountering Henry
yeah,
Corbin and
yeah,
James Hillman.
yeah.
So yeah, I like him a lot.
Can you tell me about agriculture and what it means to you?
um, Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing right off the bat is like agriculture helps me be on the land, you know.
Hmm.
Um, that maybe that's a funny thing. It's kind of like duh.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
maybe not so much now. Now we have some types of agriculture that are maybe not necessarily as tied to the land
yeah. You don't even have to
as
step foot on it
traditional.
anymore. Just
Yeah. Hmm. So I prefer that type of agriculture that ties me directly to the soil. Um, so it's another thing that I've has just been long in my life that I've always loved, um, agriculture, and
yeah,
wanted to find ways to for it to be part of my practice, a part of my life. So uh so it's also like this thing that, again, it functions like painting, right? It's like I
yeah.
want to know about something, or I want to encounter, um but the snow's really coming down. It's beautiful.
Wow.
I have a window like right here, so
I wish.
the lights that's shining on my face is the light from the window.
Wow.
It's really beautiful. um it's that kind of thing, right? The just to be like with the snow, for example. Like I love tending livestock when the weather's rough like this.
Yeah,
There's something really, um that really appeals to me. I'm sure if it was like every day was like this, I'd get sick of it,
yeah. Of course.
but
Yeah,
there's something like you feel like you're really doing something, like these things need me to take care of them,
yeah,
like this. And which is another, like I'm fascinated by by livestock and these sort of levels of domestication, and sort of this really interesting contract in a way that we have with
yeah,
animals.
yeah.
And um and how that you can like look at all these things. I think about that, and I think about, and in a similar way, like the relationship that the Plains Indians had with the bison, you know and
Yeah.
these stories about, um you know like the bison people, they were another tribe,
I
they were a
see.
people, and I mean, I'm not an expert, so, but I love those stories, and they come, like they see the humans suffering, these poor like two legs, you know that are suffering and dying, and they like basically, um I'm oversimplifying,
Hmm.
but they offer, in a sense, they like, there's stories where they're just like, okay, you can eat some of us, like we'll have this relationship where we'll
Yeah,
let you, but you have to do these things, you
yeah,
know
yeah, yeah. The
and
contract.
so there's this contract, and there's tons of stories, and uh that are really great, and like these stories with like the white buffalo woman, and there's these things of like how these traditions got established, but at the heart of it is this interesting relationship between the 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 bison and the people. And so I think about that a lot with these animals that I raise, for
Yeah,
food and for, um, fiber, and that there's this really interesting contract that, and we both have roles to play,
yeah,
and that even there's levels in there too, like, because you have, there's the goats that I have are dairy goats, and dairy animals are like way up there on the
yeah,
domestication, right? Because they've been so fine tuned
yeah,
to produce this treasure that's called milk, right? And this amazing nutritious thing that, and so it, they can be really, um temperamental or really touchy, so for example, like my sheep, which are, I'm raising them for meat and for fiber, So they lay them, they're out, they lay them out in the pasture. I hardly have to do anything,
Yeah.
and part of that is, I select the moms that I know are good moms and that don't have problems over the years.
Mm.
And so you slowly are, but with the dairy animals, because they're just a little more sensitive, you're
Yeah.
asking more of them, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so like they're in the barn and I have to, they just need my help more, it's
Mm.
because that's part of that contract is like they need me more.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the like Japanese Wagyu beef, those animals are like inside all the time.
Oh.
uh,
Okay.
there were some guys that tried to that did they inseminated, or they, it was like in vitro fertilization. So they weren't hybrids. They actually put like embryos in like
Whoa.
Angus heifers,
Yeah.
and then just and calved them out. But they didn't realize that these animals like were used to, so they all died,
Oh.
because they're not like Angus that can just
Yeah.
be born in the winter and
Yeah.
and live out on pasture. This breed is so specialized that, and requires this really intense level of care and a certain diet to be what it is. Um, so it's these funny layers. I love thinking about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I love thinking about the history of agriculture. I love thinking about um, how tight, like I think about this sort of connection where like this process that happened where we learned that the seeds that you gathered, you could pick the best ones and and not eat those, but put them back in the earth.
Yeah.
And then you
Yes.
pick the best ones from those and you put them back in the earth. And
Yeah.
how almost exactly that mirrors and develops historically with like sacrifice. You take the best thing,
Yeah.
you don't keep it for yourself, but you
Yeah.
offer it up. And so I love that parallel. I think is super fascinating that those things I virtually developed at the same time, right? You're
Yeah.
taking the best
Yeah.
thing and,
Yeah.
and throwing it away essentially, right? Offering it to God or putting it back in the land. And I think so. I love that. It's almost like the worship is a higher level of agriculture, right? It's like one level higher than taking the best and putting it in the ground. You take the best of the best and you give that to God,
Yeah.
you know and so it's really fascinating. um I love how like these how deep these relationships are, and how they're still in us, you
Yeah.
know
For sure.
they're still in us, even though at least in Western society and Western culture, we're so removed from the land, but that I think about that, and at least here, there's all these suburban lawns, and people are so meticulous about, having these lawn mowers and
Yeah.
mowing
Yeah. Yeah.
lawns and stuff. And it's like everybody's still a farmer,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
have it in them. Like there's something about that.
For sure.
It's it's a little bit twisted and unhealthy, but it's still there. Um,
Yeah. Like the ancients would look at us, be like, what
uh,
kind of weird way to manifest your
yeah.
your agricultural
Uh,
impulse, let's say, or
yeah.
talent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
that's
got to
very
be a
valid.
better way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's also I think very much a US thing to have that the lawn and the the
Mhm.
perfectly cut type of thing.
Yeah.
I grew up on not a farm, but I don't know, like a countryside house.
Okay.
And we did lawn mowing as well, but a lot of it was like rough and
Mhm.
wild. And I
Yeah.
really liked that. And then we had horses and goats,
Yeah.
but kind of more so as pets. So that's why people always ask me, was it a farm? And it's not a farm. They're kind of
Mhm.
like as pets, and
Yeah.
um, I think that changes the relationship a lot more because a pet is not anywhere near an animal that provides for you, that
Mhm.
that gives you sustenance. And I think
Yeah.
that there's something sacred in that relationship that you're describing that
Mhm.
I don't know. I think it would be good for people to realize, especially if I mean, you're eating the food from the animals,
Yeah.
but you're no longer in relationship with them. And then there's all this guilt that starts to develop, and it starts to make us into wanting to only eat plants or something like
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
I think there's something hidden in the relationship that we're missing out on, and
Mhm.
that's still in us, like you said.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. I mean, and that's even for me is a similar. I grew up in a similar thing where we had horses um and chickens and things like that, but everything it
Yeah.
was more on just just uh it wasn't a farm. It was just like you said, the horses. We there's a thing called 4-H here, so where you show horses, and we did that,
Yeah.
and we had a few pigs and things like that. But I always it was in me with that's there was always that part of me was like, this isn't enough,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
not content with like I have like you said it was very much even like I don't have any business eating these things if I can't take care of them and
Yeah.
fulfill my part of the deal, you know.
Yeah.
Like I have to be able um to at least experience it, you know. And
Yeah.
so that was a big always something that really motivated me, um and it to be able to have those relationships and to and then you realize how important it is to be, I think one of the really significant things about agriculture is that part of a you're part of a life cycle, you
Yeah.
know. um the outside of your own or attached to your own, that there's, the seasons, for example. I like living in a place that has four seasons.
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely.
because you go through this whole really pronounced life and death cycle of
Yeah.
on in the landscape, and then you also are moving through all these other cycles of growing things, and you have an intimate, you start to just see how I always uh, Wendell Berry wrote this thing of he where he's just like, it's not the wheel of life, it's the wheel of life and death,
Ah, yeah, yeah,
we always want to say, it won't turn, it's only half. Life is just half of the wheel, death
yeah,
is the other half. And so this thing isn't a true circle, it can't turn
yeah,
without death being a part of it. And so you see, to be able to see and participate that within that and all of it's on all of these levels and layers, and you realize how redemptive death is a part of the
yeah,
earth on every level,
yeah, yeah. And I think there's I mean, the lawn is a funny example, but it goes much deeper than that in the sense that we're trying to deny death nowadays, in a sense.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, I was the example of the goats. So I told you offline that when I was
Hmm.
a little kid, I saw the goats being born.
Yeah.
Such a profound experience. And then similarly, one of those goats that was born, I mean, a lot of them struggled,
Hmm.
a lot of goats.
Yeah.
And I spent a full night with one of those goats while it was slowly dying.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, I was 14, 15, and I just really felt pulled by that. So I just stayed with him
Yeah.
and and I buried him after. And that was so good for me in my development as I don't know, as a person, as a teenager.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why, but
Yeah.
I feel that it's something like you're describing. It was it's something that I look on really with it's a lot of fun. It's like it was something good that I had
Hmm.
that I made this relationship, and
Hmm.
I made it honorable as well. And
Yeah.
I made it. I think it made it for me make sense and it made it connected. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Connection, connected is a great word.
Mm,
Um, that's a great word for that because so right it describes the problem in a sense for a lot of us or is that there is a disconnection and there's no connection to death
yeah.
in life, so there's just a huge fear of it.
Yeah.
um and so it has to be sort of denied or out of the picture at all costs.
Yeah.
um I thought that was a fascinating thing with the pandemic,
Yeah.
was this like the whole world was almost like seized with a fear of death.
Yeah. Yeah. And a denial of
Um,
aid.
mhm. Like this was, and so that was fast. That's fast. It was so fascinating to me because I don't think previous cultures had that same fear of death
Oh,
that it seemed like we were gripped with in the pandemic.
yeah.
Um, so, but connected is a great, because it's one of those. It lets it stay a mystery too, because
Yeah.
you're connected with a mystery when you've watched, you held this goat that you
Yeah.
were trying to like keep going, you know,
Yeah.
and then to watch, to see an animal, like to watch that life go out of its eyes, right? It's such it's and to be, I mean, it's heartbreaking, and you grieve and you mourn it, but you're connected to this mystery, and the same thing with the birth side of it, right? You're
Yeah.
connected to this mystery, and there's no like explaining it.
No. No, that's the thing with also the whole
Yeah.
idea of like the fact that, you know, there's life that's able to be created.
Hmm.
You have two life forms and you can get a third.
Hmm.
That that is so mysterious, and you can have a biological explanation or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, that doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
doesn't explain anything. It's just like
Uh-huh. Yeah.
even more mysterious for me. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. You're just explaining the mechanics of it, but there's this
yeah,
whole essence there that like is not captured in that.
and not in any way. But having now the opportunity to relive kind of that experience that I had with the goat, I feel I was very afraid of death as a kid, and
Hmm.
especially at that age. And I think that for me, it felt really soothing to know that that goat didn't die alone.
Mm,
I know it
yeah.
felt like I was so happy that I was there,
Yeah.
and like holding it and comforting it. In a way, I was comforting myself because I
Hmm.
was,
Yeah.
I was kind of, I knew death was far away in a sense, but it was right there all the time for me.
Mm, yeah.
Laying up, I was out at night for hours. Just, I remember having this thought pattern of, um, if I die, there's nothing. Because I was really, I grew up religious in a sense, but I didn't believe any of it as a kid. And so
Hmm.
I just had this idea that there would be nothingness. And whenever I would really contemplate that, it would
Uh-huh.
terrify me.
Yeah.
And I think being with that goat, it kind of, yeah, it soothed me. And
Yeah.
it made me realize how death can connect and can bring forth life as well in a sense.
Hmm.
And so, no, thank you for bringing me back to that memory. It's very special. I
Yeah.
haven't thought about it in a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
No,
No, it's good to hear you talk about it. There's a lot there.
no.
Um, yeah, there's a lot there.
And it's not necessarily answers, like you say.
Hmm.
It's,
Yeah.
being with the mystery. I listened to your conversation, well, a large chunk of it with Bumper Sticker Faith. I don't know what
Oh,
the guy's name is
yeah.
again.
Sam.
Sam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gripped by something you said. Um, I think it came to you that God is everything. Something
Hmm.
like that, you said.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because I was kind of halfway there and I was really, really intrigued and grabbed by it.
Mhm.
But then I didn't want to listen on because I wanted to ask you
Okay.
myself to
Hmm.
understand
Yeah.
myself what that was
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Sure. Um, yeah, it was funny how it came about. And it's sort of, it's, I would say, like, it's part of the my own, like, sort of like being like going through the a long season of unknowing in a way, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember, uh oh, it was probably when that started, that particular season, and it, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And um like a lot of, I just felt like all these things were getting peeled off of me, right? And like I kept thinking, what are you doing, God? And is this like, you're taking this too? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I needed that, maybe not. And so, like, things were just getting peeled away. And but it was neat. One of the things that was really precious to me in that was that I was, like, listening to people, like listening to Master Eckhart's sermons,
Yeah.
um, or I was reading a lot of Richard Rohr,
Mm.
and he would be saying these things that were really challenging to me. And but, like, I felt my spirit really aligning with the expressions that he was making. But then there would be this part of me that would have these questions, and that sort of little kid part, like, that grew up with these forms, and the forms say this is okay and this is not okay.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay to believe this, it's not okay to believe that.
Yeah.
And uh and so I would be always be like, is this okay, God? Like, what do I do about this? And so I had these, I was kind of like, you could say, like, I had these different sources that I was, um that that were operating on me. And there was, on the one hand, were the things that were new and were operating on me, like new ideas or these new revelations that were being, and that I was, that were like, what is, and then, but then there was the sources that I knew and trusted that were also operating on me. And I would have a question about the new thing, and the old trusted thing the same day would speak to it.
Mm.
So I would, there was a lot of, like, direct sort of, like, answering
Yeah.
of, like, what do I do about this? Like, this, is this okay? And then it would immediately, like, so there was this great harmony of, like, old voices and new voices, saying, like, keep going.
Yeah.
And so funny, if that makes sense. And so, but at one point, I really felt God asking me, like, to give him a new name, for me, like, that kind of, like, there's this great tradition, right, in the Bible of the patriarchs would encounter some aspect of God, and then they would name
Yeah.
God, like El Shaddai or something,
Yeah.
right? So there's all these great names of God that these people who encountered God gave him a name. And so this, and so I was like, what, that kind of, I felt that. But I felt God saying, I want you to start calling me everything. And and I really struggled with it.
Mm.
I felt, because there's those, whenever you're whenever you're listening to voices, it's always good to, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's a whole nother conversation. But
Yeah.
uh but but there's a big discernment process, right, that you go through. But there's also that, like, I'm the good shepherd and my sheep know my voice,
Yeah.
right? So when the relationship is long, and the voice is one I'm deeply familiar with and can and trust, you know. But there's still enough of that old reserve of like, well, it's not okay to call you that, you know, like my upbringing says that that's not okay. So I'm struggling with this. And, but I was out. I remember the day that I finally like sort of like broke through that. I was out. In the summer. It was August and it was really hot. It was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was out in a pasture with my sheep,
Mm.
and I was probably moving fence around or something like that, and uh, just really intense like dialogue. Like I'm really like, what do I do? You know,
Yeah.
what are you asking me to do, and
Yeah.
what does this mean? All this stuff, and there was just a really light breeze, and there was a bunch of cottonwood trees, which have cottonwoods. There's one of the few native trees to Kansas. There's originally there weren't any trees here except for a few cottonwood trees.
Ah,
So um, and so there's these cottonwood trees, and they have these great heart-shaped leaves, and they make a beautiful sound. You know, they're related to poplars,
okay.
um, right? So they make this beautiful sound in the wind. It doesn't take very much wind to stir the leaves,
Mm.
and they make this beautiful like soft rattling sound. And it was so like it was just like wow, the Holy Spirit was in the leaves.
Yeah.
I could, you know, it was really powerful, like very present. Um, and so I finally called God everything, you know, and it was just this beautiful, intimate, like there was nothing like outwardly profound about it, you know, but it was deeply inward. It was
Yeah.
this really significant thing to call God everything for me. And so that's when I started calling God everything. And but I kept it to myself
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And but one of the interesting things that immediately God said to me was like, now I'm going to show you what that means.
Ah.
And and so there's been a big unfolding of that um over the, you know, the years since. um and so what prompted my conversation with Sam that you were listening to was this strange thing. And I think I met Emilee around this time too, and put
Mm.
uh uh I don't know if it was through, I can't remember exactly how we first
Yep.
um started talk, you know, because we had a few conversations around the same time I had that conversation with Sam. And there was this funny, so I had, you know, I'd gone through this really serious like season of like unknowing, right? Where and like unknowing in this. So the beautiful thing about you know, everything is such a funny word.
Yeah.
uh, and so it's a vast, you know, there's no limits there, you know, so everything can also be nothing, you know,
Yeah. Exactly.
right? So it's a really strange unlimited place.
Yeah.
And it's not. And I think it's interesting, you mentioned like earlier when you were talking about that goat and that sort of fear that you would die and there would be nothing. And I remember there was a cartoon when I was a kid. And I think it was called Danger Mouse. And there was the only episode I remember of this cartoon. They were somehow Danger Mouse was somehow in space, and he came to the end of the universe, and there was nothing like it was like it overwhelmed me.
Yeah.
Like this, I that he came to the end of the universe, and like there was, I mean, how they drew it. I don't know if it was just the imagery of it. It was this
Yeah.
really powerful thing that has, I've, as a concept was so strange to think about, you know? And at the same time, there was another movie that came out when I was a kid called The Never Ending Story.
Mhm.
And it's based off of a book of the same name, but the evil, I guess, I don't know if you could even call it evil, but the enemy in the story is called the Nothing,
Uh,
and it's just devouring it's eating the land, like, and it leaves nothing, like nothingness behind it. And uh so this idea of nothing is a strange thing. But I thought of those when you were talking about that,
yeah.
uh, and I'm trying to think of my relationship to it, because I know they both like, but that concept always was I'm I know it was potent, and I know it affected me, but I'm not sure in what way,
Yeah.
because I've always had a very intrinsic, like, uh I'm I struggle to want to use the natural word would be faith, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's the right word, uh but there's always been a sense of God,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, like, so there was so it was a different than, like, I think it was different than what I feel like you were describing.
Oh yeah.
But that, how nothing and everything are in this funny tension, and it's beyond, under beyond, there's some language just breaks down in places like that, right?
Yeah.
Which is great, that it does. Especially like literal language. So that's why we
Yeah.
need stories, right? That's why we need
Yeah.
stories like that.
In
That's
poetry and
why
art.
yeah.
Yeah.
So why Danger Mouse needs to go and, like, come to the end of the universe, and
Yeah.
uh or whatever. But um sorry for that digression there, but
It's good. It helps.
yeah. So it was interesting when I met, like, with Sam. He was responding to a poem slash manifesto I had written,
Yeah.
um, about 6 months earlier, but I'd shared publicly. And part of this was like a renunciation of Christianity,
Mhm.
um, which was weird. And so we were talking about all of that stuff, and part of that renunciation of Christianity is sort of like, again, like a weird, another big kind of strange story, and where I actually felt like God had asked me to, basically, it was sort of like, there's a long story, but it was essentially like Christianity had gotten between God and me.
Yes.
It was in the way,
Yeah.
right? This construct
Yeah.
was in the way. And so it had to go. I had to renounce it. And so, uh, and that was part of, like, I'm going to show you what that means. Like, now that you're
Yes.
calling me
Yes.
everything, I'm going to show you what that means. Um, so it was like, that's one of those, well, what do I do with this? It all happened so fast. It all happened, like, I had this, sort of happened over 3 weeks,
Hmm.
in a funny way. Like, I think it happened over a longer period than that, but
Yeah.
I woke up and I had this, sometimes you wake up with a strong, just, weight on you,
Yeah.
or I do. And it was like, there was just something heavy on me. that in the same way you would wake up if you were really worried about something
Yeah.
that was really bothering you
Yeah.
and you just couldn't get it, you couldn't get rid of it. Like it was like that, except I had no idea. I wasn't worried about something, in
Yeah.
that way. It was this huge weight and I knew it was bigger than me. It was one of those, I just knew it was outside of myself. And so I'm like immediately asking God, like, what is this weight? Where is this coming from? And after a, a while of asking and getting into a place where I could listen, I heard just like, you know, I hate your culture is what I heard. Like, I hate your culture. And I immediately knew it was like this Christian culture
Mm.
that I was just butting up against, that I would describe it as like this American Western Christianity that uh that that's it didn't feel like it wasn't like contemporary secular culture at all. Like
No.
that wasn't the like it wasn't that wasn't where it was directed. It was like this. So I'm like, well, what do I do with that? What am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
It's like um and I started, a good friend of mine, I said, I heard I recounted that to him, and he's said something. There's this character that I've worked with for a long time in my art named Walking Man. And so I'm always doing drawings about this Walking Man character.
Mhm.
And he's sort of like an everyman and a self portrait autobiographical
Yeah.
character. So
Yeah.
both at the same time, right? Um, and so he said something about like, what does it mean for Walking Man to be on fire for God? Like, you should do a drawing. Like, I don't know where he was coming from with that, but I've learned to trust him. But
Mm.
the language he was using was off putting to me because it was really reflective of that
Yeah.
culture that I was feeling like butting up against, like on fire for the Lord,
Yeah. Yeah.
this, and that's not like his normal language, but
Ah.
it was like, okay, well, what do I do? But I took it. He's a wise man and I always take him seriously. So I didn't know how to draw what he was suggesting. And I ended up doing a drawing of Walking Man sitting on the ground. No, kneeling. Walking Man was like kneeling on his face, like so his face was on the ground, on his knees in front of the burning bush.
Ah.
Like that's the drawing that came out of me,
Yeah.
in response to that. Like, and so the next week, like clockwork, I wake up on Monday and I have that exact same feeling, that same weight that's coming from outside of me. And and go through the same process. Like, what is this coming from? Like, what does this mean? Like, where is this coming from? I get to a place of listening and I hear like, your culture makes me sad.
Mm.
And so I'm like, so I start like again to process. I'm doing these drawings. And so like I start like the next drawing, Walking Man is sitting cross-legged, like he's sat up now, and he's like sitting cross-legged and facing the burning bush. And like I think there's like a hand coming out of the bush that's on fire. And I felt like in my mind like that there was like, it took like months for Walking Man to go from kneeling on his face to sitting. Like
Yeah.
he was there for so long, like it took him that long before he's like, okay, I'm like to work up that courage to sit instead of be on his face.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the drawings kind of through this process, like the drawings, um, the next drawing, he's like starting to like reach towards the bush, and the flames are reaching towards him. Um, so the next a week goes by, and the next Monday, I wake up again with that same weight. And this time, like I'm asking, I'm not getting any answer. And so, how my mornings work is I get up really early in the morning and come out to my studio while it's still dark and work on paintings and
Mm.
things like that. And it's just this time, especially in the winter. This is in January, almost exactly like
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, so, but so that I have especially in the winter, I have a nice 2 or 3 hours before it's light and I go and do my chores. And so that morning, like I'm just listening, and I never got an answer while I was painting. And so I was out in my barn getting ready to feed animals. So I'm gathering hay and whatever. Um, and I was really like, the weight has shifted to this kind of question with, how am I supposed to raise my children? Because I struggle so much with these ways of raising Christian children, right? And I just wrestle with it so much. And I can't reconcile myself to these, like, you know um just how that culture that surrounds it, like I'm struggling with the language, but it leaves me like not knowing what to do, because I
Yeah.
love God so much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
and and I want my kids to know God, but I also, like, I'm not but I'm not convinced of the way.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it seems like it's done without thought, or it's done just trying to get them to know the right answers, or these things like that, right, that I really struggle with. And um so I'm always asking, and my wife and I are always like, how do we do this? Like, what's this supposed to look like,
Yeah.
and we're always trying different things. And but I'm really wrestling, like that's the tone of my wrestling just really got enveloped in that. And so I'm having these, I hate your culture makes me sad, so I'm really butting up against that stuff.
Yeah.
And I hear God say, like, well, what if you weren't a Christian anymore? Like, would that help? But I mean, it was so strange. Like, it was like this, I have an idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try this.
Yeah.
And it's like, uh before I could even think about it, before my mind could even process that, I was happy. It was already, like, I
Yeah.
had already ceased. I was already not a Christian. It was weird. Like, before I could even, it just was there. And um and it was, in a sense, it was like I instantly was uprooted, like as a tree. Like, I've always seen myself as a tree. So I was uprooted and replanted, just like that, like
Yeah.
pulled up and replanted upside down.
Mm. Yeah.
And like, this was like so like palpably happening to me, like, um at that moment. And so suddenly, like, my head is underground, but I'm in this soil that's like the best soil I've ever seen,
Ah.
like the most rich, dark, healthy soil I've ever seen. And I'm suddenly like, um I'm just I and so, like, it ushered in this about a 3-month period of, is it's almost impossible to describe.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh it was like an ongoing, like, encounter, like this, like, I mean, I was living my normal life. Like I was able to like still do things, but like I'm constantly like I'm underground. I'm experiencing like I've I always I'm like this all of this underground consciousness, you
Yeah.
know, like a big part of my theology has for a long time has been, I should preface that, and this is so much of this. I mentioned my friend who challenged me to do the drawing of
Yeah.
Walking Man on Fire. Like,
Yeah.
so we've been friends for 25 years
Well,
and have grown and like deeply intimate friends that wrestle through really complex stuff together all the time. So like there's times where we're almost like one person, you
mm,
know. It's and so just a really neat special friendship. And but so like we had come, one of the things that we had learned through our friendship together and our experiences together was that, you know, everybody always kind of looks up to heaven for revelation,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And like you think like God's voice and you expect God's voice to come, like that revelation to come from heaven. And but then there's this equal, we we just learned that God's voice is also in the earth, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and so like everything, like there's a verse that says like his voice, what God speaks, like his word will never return back empty,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Or void or without accomplishing what it set out to do,
yeah.
you know. And so I think about, in a sense, like every the beautiful myth of like God create, like speaking creation into being, you know, like I think that part of that deep truth is like it's all that voice, it's all that heaven, it's all that revelation,
Yeah.
like it's all God speaking. And so every particle of everything is God's voice speaking,
Yeah.
right? And so it was this idea, so to have my head underground and to be exposed to this consciousness is like it's still everything, right? I'm still being exposed, but it's a side of everything that I've never encountered before.
Mm,
um and it's deeply connected to the earth. and and so like all this stuff was just, it was so overwhelming and crazy. And um so that was, and part of that, like right, almost immediately I wrote this sort of manifesto poem of, because one thing I felt God say was like, you can't like keep this a secret.
yeah.
Like I know you've been sitting on all this stuff that you're afraid to share with people, like even my friend. Like I know you're sitting on all this stuff that you're afraid to share. Like that time, that's over. Like you don't, like you have to do this in front of people,
Yeah.
right? And that was really strange. Like there's all this stuff that I knew, like, and like there was just, there's too much that I can share about now, but it's just, but so, but so part of that was like I have to write, I have to share, I have to find a way to tell my wife, I have to find a way to tell my friends, everybody, like all these close people that are all part of this Christian community, right? That I just renounced Christianity. How
Yeah.
is this going to go down?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do I communicate this? And
Yeah.
so I wrote this thing, and and I sent it to a friend, another dear friend of mine, that just was like, I need to send it to him first, you know. And and so I just gradually kind of shared it with a few people, and then trying to, and in the meantime I'm like going through all of this weird stuff, you know, of like um waking up in the middle of the night. I had to start carrying this little notebook with me all the time to be able to write things down. And um it was so intense and so overwhelming. And but over time, right, so I get to the summer and I felt God saying like, I told you you needed to share this, like you need to find a way to share this. And so I posted a video of myself reading it on Instagram. And that's how I met Sam.
Yeah.
He saw it and he was like, I want to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
um, and so now we're good. Now we do a podcast together actually, and
Oh,
with another
really?
guy. Uh-huh.
Oh,
Um, so it's I think through him I met, because I think he knew Emilee already
yeah,
maybe, and I think it maybe through him I met Emilee.
yeah,
Um, and so he really engaged me on all of that, because a lot of people just reacted like immediately when you say, because people really, it's hard when people were there for the Christianity and for, here's this guy, a Christian artist. And
yeah.
so I think I disappointed a lot of people
I see.
with that,
Hmm.
um, which wasn't what I was, certainly not what I set out to do.
No.
Um, but it was inevitable, right? Um, and I'm still trying to understand it, still wrestling with that whole thing and what that's about. But it's part of that. It's directly related to the whole reason I told all of this was like, I'm going to show you what that means. You
Yeah.
start calling me everything. Now I'm going to show you what that means. Um, and there's kind of like, and I don't think I try and be clear that it's like, I don't think that's God's calling other people to do that.
Yeah. I
Like,
didn't get
I
that
would never,
sense either.
yeah, yeah, I wouldn't advise anybody to do that. Like, it was terrifying. Like,
Yeah.
and it still terrifies me because I mean, it's like, this isn't without consequences,
No,
you
no.
know, and, but it also felt like it's also not without great purpose. Right.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, if God is asking me to know him, or bigger than him, like God's bigger than, it's hard to use just him, right? I don't know you know, what God's pronouns are, right? They, sometimes I use they, but usually I just revert and say everything. I don't know what everything's, right? I want to know everything,
Yeah.
and I don't want there to be limits. And I know that limits are really important,
Yeah.
but I also recognize that if God is pulling them away for a season for me, that I have to follow that, um,
Yeah.
and even if it means, so like the ultimate picture of Walking Man in the Burning Bush, the last one is, there's like two more, like one, he's fully embraces the bush and is on fire. And then the last one, he's laying on the ground and the bush is growing out of his chest on fire. So it's just that kind of like, that's what I felt like the process that I
Yeah.
was going through, was like, now I'm just the soil in which the burning bush is growing. Um, that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
so it's a it's a strange thing. And that but it's learning what it means to call God everything. And so there's a lot of that knowing and unknowing all bashing around together in there,
Yeah.
and trying to sort all that out, or not sort it out. Maybe sometimes it's tempting to want to sort it out,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
it's not my job, right?
No, no, not to get answers, but to be with the mystery. I mean, for me, this sounds a lot like kind of what I went through myself in the sense that grew up with the faith, kind of not renounced it, but just rebelled against it angrily as a teenager.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then found my way to an experience of God, let's say, overwhelming presence of love and something that was so undeniable.
Yeah.
But it came at a time where I was completely, I mean, I was starting to get spiritually open to things,
Uh-huh.
but even in the experience itself, I was like, this is not Christian God or whatever, because
Uh-huh.
that was still my rebellious side. And afterwards, I
Mm-hmm.
spoke to my parents about it, and they're devout Christians, and I was explaining to them like
Mm-hmm.
um, that this to me wasn't what I was raised with as what God was described, and so for me, the Christianity was so not Christ, but Christianity for me was something that got
Yes,
in the way of my experience of God.
right. Yeah.
and that's what it sounds like to me that you're describing. For me, I needed to kind of renounce it to see through the glasses again instead of looking at the glasses and kind of like seeing all the dirt that's there and just not being able to see through it. And it's yeah, it allowed me to afterward get back to my faith. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what has to happen for you or what's going to happen for you, but it's just that um, that I see how fruitful it can be to get rid of a structure or a,
Yeah.
you know, and
Mhm.
so I
Yeah.
hope that that helps you get a lot of insights that perhaps were blocked before. Let's say,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really good. It's definitely like, it's very much what I felt like. What kind of what you're saying is that it wasn't about Christ at all. It was about
yeah,
Christianity. It's like, because my faith has remained intact,
mhm,
like I never lost my faith.
yeah,
Um, it was just, I was just essentially directed to renounce Christianity, and
yeah,
which is a really hard thing to say, or it's easy to say, but it's like, uh, and it is, I like one of the things I should say too, like one of the things I've noticed about like God's voice often is that it's, um, you know, you can like talk about radio frequencies or something, like where there's like a carrier, like there's more than one message on one
yeah,
like band, right? And so I realized like one of the like what I heard, I told you like that I heard that like, what if you weren't a Christian anymore, would that help? Like I realized also in that message was this message:
yeah,
you're not a Christian anymore, you're mine. you know
yeah, yeah,
and so
yeah,
it's just like, you're mine, that's all that, like, and and it's important to realize like that's the function of Christianity, right? That's Christ, is
yes,
to reconcile. Like Christ is, he, like that sacrifice was to make me his.
mm,
So
yeah, yeah,
like, and so it was just kind of like, uh that was just like, none of this is like matters,
no,
sort of, or something,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
you belong to me, like you're mine. So
yeah,
if I say you're not a Christian, then you're not a Christian. You belong to me. um so like that was, it was like that was what was on the same, like that was being said at the same time, right,
yeah,
as that. um so uh so yeah, it's important to kind of like distinguish, or say like, yeah, I didn't. And that was my wife's first question, when I told her, and I said, it's not, I'm not renouncing Christ.
oh,
It's, that's Christianity that I was called to renounce. And
mm,
um to what purpose I'm um still listening and wrestling with actively,
yeah,
and so it's interesting, but I sometimes I almost imagine, it's like there's these little things like, I now have this funny perspective of Jonah. It's again one of those stories that I've always thought about. And Emilee makes a lot of art about Jonah, and I've made a lot of art about Jonah over the years too. And so we kind of have that Jonah in common. And we've talked about that a little bit.
mm,
But I think, there's that funny, when Jonah was, I imagine now, when I think about Jonah, that it was like God was saying, you're not an Israelite anymore.
yeah,
You're a Syrian. Go to
yeah,
Nineveh or something like that. And
yeah,
he's like, what? you know? So
yeah,
I don't know. It's one of those funny things of like, it's just a different perspective on, or that I imagine that moment of is that what God was asking of him, is like, so I don't know, but it's just one of those things that,
yeah,
as I'm wrestling with it myself, um, to, you know, what is it? It flavor, it changes the how you look at everything, you know.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, that's a way to put it. I hope that your wrestling will get you to a place where you feel like you're fulfilling a purpose, and I think you are.
I appreciate that. I thank you for that.
Oh,
um, it's funny that it's funny even in all of the unfolding and unpeeling. I've even found my looking for a purpose or meaning to be a trap sometimes, you know. um, Even though I still want it, I still definitely want purpose and meaning. And there's this great William James. Uh, I wonder, I've got it written down somewhere
mm.
because it's pretty interesting. Um, if you'll be patient with me while I find it
Of
here,
course, please.
um, and hopefully I'm even looking in the right notebook. Is this kind of the old version of scrolling for your phone through your phone looking for a picture that you want to show to somebody?
Yeah. I think there's some power to the waiting. I think it helps you get primed to listen.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That'll be close here. Owen Barfield. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so this is William James. Just it just made when you were talking about the purpose,
Mm.
this was fresh in my mind because I'd looked at it again recently. Um, I confess that I do not see why the very existence of an invisible world may not in part depend on the personal response which any one of us may make to the religious appeal. God Himself, in short, may draw vital strength and increase of very being from our fidelity. For my own part, I do not know what the sweat and blood and tragedy of this life mean, if they mean anything short of this. If this life be not a real fight in which something is eternally gained for the universe by success, it is no better than a game of private theatricals from which one may withdraw at will. But it feels like a real fight, as if there were something really wild in the universe, which we, with all our idealities and faithfulnesses, are needed to redeem. And first of all, to redeem our own hearts from atheisms and fears. Such a so good. um, and it kind of immediately like reminds me of there's a Eddie Hillesum was um, she might have been, oh, she died in Auschwitz,
Mm.
but she wrote, this is a statement that she made that
Mm.
really kind of like harmonizes with that. It's like, and she's writing, like she's praying essentially, talking to God, and she's like, alas, there doesn't seem to be much that you yourself can do about our circumstances, about our lives. You cannot help us, but we must help you and defend your dwelling place in us to the last. Um, which utterly blows my mind. But this whole idea of like, seems like they're both kind of saying like that, like part of the thing is like, you know, we always think of like, always want God to fight for us,
Yeah.
or do these things for us. And it's like this whole idea that part of this fight, part of the battle, or part of like the purpose is to like like with her, with Eddie, here she is. It's like there's nothing that like this, there's no escape for us, you know,
Yeah.
and but we'll defend your dwelling place in us to the very end. Like is so
Yeah.
unfathomable. And it's but like William James saying that thing of like we're redeeming ourselves and like defending the dwelling place of God at the same time, you know, like it turns the whole purpose thing on its head in a
Yeah.
way, you know. It's
Yeah.
really crazy, really
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
um so it's yeah, to be facing like that extinguishment, to be facing death, to be facing nothingness, and like that's your response is to like, I will defend God's dwelling place in
Yeah.
me, uh is pretty, so it's very beautiful.
It is. I didn't expect us to get this far in terms of time, but I actually have to pick up my wife from work.
All right.
But it's been truly a joy every second of this conversation, listening to you and interacting and yeah, I guess you sharing so openly means a lot to me, even though we're strangers before this.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, I'm very inspired, and please tell me also the podcast you're doing with Sam, so that I
yeah,
can share it and listen to it myself because I wasn't aware that this existed.
sure. Yeah, it's called The Color of Dust,
Okay.
and it's with Sam Key and a poet named Seth Wick from Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and then myself, and it's just the three of us talking about art and God and different things, and so it's
It sounds like what I'm looking for. So
all right, cool. Well,
I'd
yeah, I
love
hope you,
to
if you
listen.
can't find it, let me know.
Yeah, please.
I'll send you a link to it, or I'll go ahead and just email that to you. So
Thank you so much, and
yeah, thank you.
love to talk
Great
to
to
John
talk
at
with you.
some point. I'm sure
Sure.
there are so many questions I had, but then there were certain tangents that I just really wanted to take in the moment, and I'm really
Mm,
happy that we did so. Um,
cool.
and I hope the birth goes well. The
Thank you.
out. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, God bless you. And until next time,
Till next time. God bless you too. Have a good day.
thank you.